You'll have to excuse the non-technical among us. I am one of them. But I'm going to see if I can make this work, because there's a lot of words, and sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words if we can make a picture work. So, my kids are messing with this, so we know how that goes. Hopefully, this will. Alright, it worked. Alright, there's a chapter. Alright, before I get started, I'll adjust the microphone so everybody can hear me. Just to, as always, give a quick, try to make a real quick update on things that are going on at camp. We've had the most amazing winter of all. I could take winters like this for the rest of my career at Phantom Ranch without any shedding of tears. It's been awesome. At the 50s last week, being able to get stuff down outside and work on things other than snow plowing has been a tremendous blessing. It has really allowed us to use our time. I don't want to say use our time well, but sometimes I feel like moving snow is a waste of time because you move it and then it melts and then more comes and you move it and it melts and what am I doing? I've only had to plow one time and it was a very light plow, probably sometime last week. At the same time, it's been cold enough where we've been able to do things outside that are fun. Like we walked across Phantom Lake last week as a family. Well, most of us walked, some of us rode on a sled that I was pulling, but it was a good little adventure. And a huge blessing is we host a humongous group every year around this time. It happened to be last weekend, which is actually why I asked Dan if I could do this chapter instead of last week. We basically take camp and we pack it as full as we can, and then we rent beds at one of the camps that's just down the road in East Troy and fill their beds, and then it is just madness for a weekend. Thankfully, it all went well. The group had a good time. As far as the maintenance concerns go, we didn't have any, which is always a huge thing. I always get worried when our buildings are that full because they're old, and if things go wrong, all of a sudden now you're scrambling to try to make things right. And I guess we did have one problem. We had a shower drain that was thawed or frozen. We tried, we could not get it to thaw. But the group was all right with it, and they just used the rest of the bathroom and showered in another cabin. But anyways, so that's Phantom Ranch. It's never a dull moment in ministry. Okay, so this morning we're going to be looking at Joshua 18 and 19. I've been thinking about these chapters that we've been going through, and they are kind of, I'm surprised. I'll say this sort of tongue-in-cheek, but also I'm probably not wrong. We might be if one of maybe a handful of churches in the entire country that is going to be covering Joshua 18 and 19 today, because these are chapters I think that we often read, and we kind of read quickly through them because it's a lot of words and a lot of names. And at first glance, it can seem like perhaps there's not a lot of meat. And when Dan asked me about speaking, and I was like, all right, we'll just take the 2 chapters, we'll just go for it. I started reading them, and I came up with the question, what am I going to do with this? Because there's a part of it where it's here, and as we know, when Elias was here, he gave us the charge. God took the time to record in great detail these works of the things that were done in the dividing of the land, as we're going to look at. And yet at the same time, how do you put this together in a message that is not too, I guess for lack of a better term, dry where it's boring, or conversely where it's just so academic that it's just kind of also boring and it doesn't have a lot of spiritual application and uplifting and correction and proof and all that stuff. But we know that all God's word is suitable for that. So as we look at this morning, I hope that you will take away from it the same things I did as I got to looking at it in a little bit more depth and slowed down. And I think my conclusion hopefully will make some of this stuff all make more sense as far as to answer that question of what do we do with it. It also dawned on me as I was preparing, because as Elias said, God wrote it, we should read it. So we are going to read through both chapters. which, interestingly enough, is a struggle in of itself. As many of you know, I am a native English speaker. I speak a little Spanish and zero Hebrew. And the majority of this chapter is transliterated Hebrew words. So do not take any of my pronunciations as accurate, because I can assure you they probably are not. But they are there, and there are many places and towns and cities that, if those are cities still today, my apologies to anybody that might be listening to this in the future. I'm sorry I mispronounced your city's name. So with that, we will read through Joshua 18 and 19 in its entirety, and then we'll go back through and talk about it. Then the congregation, starting verse 1, and the whole congregation of the sons of Israel assembled themselves at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there, and the land was subdued before them. There remained among the sons of Israel 7 tribes who had not divided their inheritance. So Joshua said to the sons of Israel, "How long will you put off entering to take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you? Provide for yourselves 3 men from each tribe, that I may send them, and that they may arise and walk through the land and write a description of it according to their inheritance. Then you shall return to me. They shall divide it into 7 portions. Judah shall stay in his territory of the south, and the house of Joseph shall stay in the territory of the north. You shall describe the land in 7 divisions and bring the descriptions here to me. I will cast lots for you here before the Lord our God. For the Levites have no portion among you, because the priests of the Lord is their inheritance. Gad and Reuben and the half tribe of Manasseh have received their inheritance eastward beyond the Jordan, which Moses the servant of the Lord gave them." Then the men arose and went, and Joseph commanded them who sent to describe the land, saying, "Go and walk through the land and describe it, and return to me, then I will cast lots for you here before the Lord in Shiloh." So the men went and passed through the land and described it by cities in 7 divisions in a book, and they came to Joseph in the camp in Shiloh. And Joshua cast lots for them in Shiloh before the Lord, and there Joshua divided the land to the sons of Israel according to their divisions. Now the lot of the tribe of the sons of Benjamin came up according to their families, and the territory of their lot lay between the sons of Judah and the sons of Joseph. Their border on the north side was the Jordan. Then the border went up to the side of Jericho on the north, and went up through the hill country westward, and ended in the wilderness of Beth-aven. From there the border continued to Luz, the side of Luz, that is Bethel, southward, and the border went down to Adar, near the hill, which lies in the south of Lord Beth-horon. The border extended from there and turned around on the west side southward from the hills which lies before Beth-horon southward, and ended in Kirith Baal, that is, not even going to try to pronounce that one, a city of the sons of Judah. This was the west side. Then the south side was the edge of Kirith Jearim, and the border went westward and went to the fountain of the waters of Naphtali. The border went down to the edge of the hill, which is the valley of Ben Hinnom, which is the valley of Riphaim northward, and went down to the valley of Hinnom to the slope of the Jebusite southward, and went down to En Rogel. It extended northward and went to Eshemesh, and went to Gilead, which is opposite the ascent of Idiom, and it went down to the stone of Boan, the son of Reuben. It continued to the side in front of Arabah northward, and went down to Arabah. The border continued to the side of Beth Holgeth northward, and the border ended at the north bay of the Salt Sea at the south end of the Jordan. That was the south border. Moreover, the Jordan was its border on the east side. This was the inheritance of the sons of Benjamin, according to their families, according to the borders all around. Now the cities of the tribe of the sons of Benjamin, according to their families, were Jericho, Beth-Oleth, Emekizeth, Beth-Arabah, Zemran, Bethel, Avium, Para, Oprah, Sipher, Amini, Ophni, Geba, 12 cities with their villages, Gibeon, Ramah, and Beroth, and Mispeth, Shephereth, Moza, Rechem, April, Terala, Zela, Helpha, Jebusites, that is Jerusalem. Gibeah, Kerith, 14 cities with their villages. This was the inheritance of the sons of Benjamin, according to their families. Still with me? Next chapter.
Good job.
Then the second lot fell to Simeon, to the sons of the Simeon, according to their families, and their inheritance was in the midst of the inheritance of the sons of Judah. So they had their inheritance of Beersheba, and Sheba, and Moladah, and Hazar Shul, and Bala, and Eziam, and Otola, and Bethel, and Hormah, and Ziklag, and Beth Morkabeth, Both, and Hazar Susha, and Beth Lebeth, and Shuriam, 13 cities and their villages, Ain, Rimian, Ether, Ashan, 4 cities with their villages, and all the villages which were around these cities as far as Beleth, Bera, Ramah, and the Negev. On this was the inheritance of the sons of Simeon according to their families. The inheritance of the sons of Simeon was taken from a portion of the sons of Judah, for the share of the sons of Judah was too large for them, So the sons of Simeon received an inheritance in the midst of Judah's inheritance. Now the third lot came up for the sons of Zebulun, according to their families, and the territory of their inheritance was as far as Serah. Then their border went up to the west and to Marlah, and it touched Debesh, reached to the brook that is at Jekonim. Then it turned from Sarid to the east toward the sunrise, as far as the border of Chisloth Tabor, and proceeded to Deboreth and up to Jephthah. Then it continued eastward toward the sunrise of Gath Heber to Eth Kazan, and proceeded to Rimion, which stretches to Neah. The border circled around it on the north to Hanathon and ended in the valley of Iphatel. Included were Kittith and Nahal and Shimron and Adullam and Bethlehem, 12 cities with their villages. This was the inheritance of the sons of Zebulun according to their families. These were the cities and their villages. The fourth lot fell to Issachar, to the sons of Issachar according to their families. Their territory was Jezreel, which included Chesulah and Shunem, and Haphram and Shimin, and Anarath, and Rabbith, and Kishon, and Ebez, and Remeth, and Ganin, and Hadadah, and Beth Hazar. The border reached to Tabor and Shahuzimah and Beth Shemesh, and their borders ended at the Jordan, 16 cities with their villages. This was the inheritance of the tribes of the sons of Issachar according to their families. The cities with their villages. Now the fifth lot fell to the tribe of the sons of Asher according to their families. Their territory was Helkath and Helai, Bethan, Eshba, Elimelech, Amad, Mishal, and reached to Carmel on the west side of Shuhur Lebaneth, and turned towards the east to Beth Dagon, and reached to Zebulun, the city of Iphatel, northward to Beth Mech and Neel, then proceeded on north to Kabul, and Ebron, and Rehob, and Haman, and Kenneth, as far as this great city, and the border turned to Ramath into the fortified city of Tyre. Then the border turned to Sisaiah, and ended at the sea by the region of the Eshdiz. Included were Umah, and Ekdek, and Rehob, 22 cities with their villages. This was the inheritance of the tribe of Asher, according to their families, their cities with their villages. The sixth lot fell to the sons of Naphtali, according to their families. Their border was from Heleth, from the oak to Zenanin, to Adam, Adimai, Netkeb, and Jabneel, as far as Lakum, and ended at the Jordan. Then the border turned westward to Aznath Tabor, and proceeded from there to Hukok. It reached to Zebulun on the south, and touched Asher on the west, and to Judah at the Jordan towards the east. The fortified cities were Zidium, Zer, Hamath, Raketh, Chinnereth, Adamah, Ramah, Hazor, Kadesh, Edrei, and En-Hazor, and Yimrin, and Megadel, Orm, and Beth Anah, and Beth Shemesh, 19 cities with their villages. This was the inheritance of the sons of Naphtali, according to their families. The cities with their villages. The seventh lot fell to the tribes of the sons of Dan, according to their families. The territory for the inheritance was Zorah, and Eshtaol, and Irshemish, and Shelabin, and Jolam, and Ithan, and Elam, and Timnath, and Ekron, and Etek, and Gibeon, and Bala, and Jehud, and Bernah, and Gath Rimion, and Me, Jarkum, and Rakom, with the territory over Jobah. The territory of the sons of Dan proceeded beyond them, for the sons of Dan went up and fought with Lishem and captured it. Then they struck it with the edge of the sword and possessed it and settled it in it, and they called Leshem Dan after the name of Dan their father. This was the inheritance of the sons of Dan according to their families, these cities with their villages. When they had finished apportioning the land for the inheritance by its borders, the sons of Israel gave an inheritance to the midst to Joshua, the son of Nun, in accordance with the commandment of the Lord, gave them the city which he asked, Timnath Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim. So he built the city and settled it. These are the inheritances which Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun, the heads of the households of the tribes of the son of Israel, distributed by lot in Shiloh before the Lord at the doorway of the tent of meeting. So they finished dividing the land. It's a lot to read, and a lot of names. I'm sure that you pronounced all those names differently in your head, and that's okay. We can argue about who's right later. I don't know if we'll actually figure out who was right. So, what I'm going to do for the sake of time, because I'm probably not going to read through all of that again, we'll kind of just go through it in chunks, and then we'll talk about some different things. I think I'm going to switch the slide right now, because interestingly enough, if you look at this map, there's basically the illustrated depiction of what I just read. Probably a little bit more clear. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it's there. Okay, so in verse 1, it says, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel assembled themselves at Shiloh, and they set up the tent of meeting there, and the land was subdued before them. There remained among the sons of Israel 7 tribes who had not yet divided their inheritance. So those tribes, as we just heard, was Benjamin, Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan. And what's interesting is at this point, the land has been subdued, meaning there's no more fighting to be had. So Joshua then asked the question in verse 3. So Joshua said to the sons of Israel, how long will you put off entering to take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you? As I was thinking about this, there is a great parallel, which I'm looking at the clock, so I'm going to have to be quick here. There's a whole lot of things that are talked about in regards to the Christian life that are in the past tense. I know for you guys have been here forever, you've heard me talk about this. What is interesting about Joshua's statement is how long will you put off taking possession of the land that the Lord has given you? This is their land already. It is a past tense thing. And as I think about the Christian life, there are many things that are written of us after we put in our faith in Christ that are written in the past tense. One of the ones that, when I first read it, still throws me for a loop because it's one of those, this is their land, but they do not possess it. And I think the freedom that we have in Christ is ours, even though at times we fail to possess it. And for the sake of time, I'll look at it briefly, is Romans 6 is one of those examples. Romans 6 verse 1, it says, what shall we say? Are we to continue in sin that grace may increase? May it never be. How shall we who have died to sin still live in it? Or do you not know all those that you have been baptized into Christ Jesus have been baptized into his death? Therefore we have been buried with him through baptism into his death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead to the glory of the Father, so too we might walk in the newness of life. For if we become united with him in the likeness of his death, certainly we shall also be in the likeness of his resurrection. Knowing this, that our old self was crucified with him in order that our body of sin might be done away with, so that we would no longer be slaves to sin. For he who has died is free from sin. Those are things that are written in the past. Those are things that are true of us today in the same way that these people possessed the land, even though they were not taking hold of and enjoying it. I think that oftentimes these truths of our Christian life can simultaneously be true, that these are true and these are ours, and yet we fail to possess them. So, because I still have 2 chapters and I'm only 3 verses in to the first chapter, I'm going to keep moving forward. But I will remind you, there's a passage in Galatians that this was probably one of the most pivotal verses, even though I realize contextually it's speaking specifically of the law. But it says in Galatians 5:1, it says, it was for freedom that Christ has set you free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to the yoke of slavery, speaking to the law. But that idea, it was for freedom that Christ has set you free. If you are living a Christian life weighed down by the burden of sin, there's so much that we could talk about. I could talk for the next 3 hours about this. And if you have questions, I would love to talk about it because it's one of my favorite topics. But know this. In the same way that right now, it's kind of funny and ironic that Joshua is criticizing Israel, saying, why don't you take possession of the land? But at the same time, they actually don't even know what they have. He says, you got to go in there and figure out what it is. And that was the next direction. And if you're living bound up in sin, you need to spend time studying the Word of God and figuring out what you have in order to be able to take hold of it. Oftentimes, we don't take possession of the things that we don't know we are in possession of. And the only way to do that is time and surveying the Bible and digging in and looking. So that is my encouragement to you, and trying to keep myself from getting too far off on the rabbit trail. So, know that our God makes promises in the past tense. And he did this, and it's been a beautiful study just looking through Joshua and all these sort of coming to fruition, these promises that God made to Abraham, like you will be the father of many nations, and here he has a nation of people that he's trying to settle in a land that he said he would give to them. God makes these promises in the past tense. He continues to do that, and we can see through the Israel's experience, God did not fall short on keeping those promises, and I have no reason to believe that he's going to fall short for us today. So we can move forward in faith knowing that. But in order for them to take hold of the land, first they needed to figure out what was there. And it says in verse 4, provide for yourselves 3 men from each tribe that I may send them, that they may arise and walk through the land and write a description of it according to their inheritance. Then they shall return to me. So you have 21 people going into the land that has been subdued for them to go and take a survey. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to talk about something briefly because it's something we'll often hear about, but there is a beautiful wisdom in the system that Joshua prescribed here. And the concept is actually one that is still widely used, in a manner of speaking, in medicine. Have you ever heard the idea of a double-blind clinical trial? What they do for clinical trials for a medication is you take people, you take a group of people, and you randomly divide those people. And oftentimes it'll be people that have a medical condition, so the randomness is somewhat moving anyway. Anyways, you take a group of people, and to one group of people, you'll give a medication, and to the other group of people, you'll give a placebo. When you do that, the people getting the medicine don't know who's getting it. But the double-blind portion comes when the people giving the medication also don't know who's getting it. And they make observations. And then based on those observations, there's a third party that knows who actually got what. And they look at the results of those things and say, well, this person had this and we gave them the medication. They do some statistical analysis and say, for the majority of people that took this, there was an improvement in X condition. But if you don't have it blinded, there can be bias involved. And the people that get the placebo say, oh, this worked really well. But if people know that you're getting a placebo, then the person reporting on it can kind of jimmy the data, if you will. If you look at what Joshua did here, he said, take these men and go into the land. There's a representative, 3 representatives from every tribe. And as they went into the land, nobody knew who was going to get what. They just had to go and survey the land and divide it up. They had no idea who was getting what. And they came up with 7 portions that are described here, and they wrote them down in a book. Joshua didn't know who was getting what. Joshua didn't see the land. Now, arguably, we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end because he had already been there, but to a certain extent, he didn't know the descriptions. His job was just to cast the lot. And as a result of that, the land was divided in a sense as fairly as possible. If they had gone and said, well, this is going to be my portion, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be mine, so I'm going to maybe push the boundary a little bit more. I'm going to make sure I get that spring or that city. But they had no idea who was getting what. So there was a wisdom in the fairness of how they divided it, and I thought it was interesting that that same concept is still used today to keep people from meddling in making things better for themselves. In verse 7, where it says that the Levites have no portion among you because of the priesthood, what's interesting is we read through this, if you remember, Steve covered that, which I think is kind of cool that I know who taught all this stuff. And then in the next one where it's Gad and Reuben and the half-tribe of Manasseh, I'm pretty sure Dan covered that. And we've got to go through and see, and if we've been paying attention, where all of these different tribes have gotten their parts, and it's kind of neat to be able to look at this map and kind of know what it is. How did it work? How did these people get it? Why did Reuben and Gad get that side? All those questions. It's fun when we take the time to study these chapters sort of from an academic sense, which was what we have done, and then we mix that with practical application, which has been really cool to see how, in basically studying maps and apportionment of land, the spiritual applications that Dan has brought out, Elias brought out, Steve has brought out, and even to myself as I was preparing this has been really quite neat. Now, with that being said, it doesn't actually get into great detail as you look at these descriptions as to why they chose what they chose. Why did this line curve here? I don't know. But the guys that went out into the land were trying to, I'm assuming, make things as fair as possible. There's another map that I have that if we have time, I'll pull it up and we can look at sort of the land before the Israelites that sort of show the highways, if you will. I guess I can pull it up and let's go back to it. Nope. This is a map of the land before it was the land that belonged to Israel, even though I guess it was always kind of there. But if you can see these different marks on here, there's roads, and, well, paths, if you will. But those paths are what allow cities tend to form around roads where people can come and go. And I think that's why you see on some of this map here, why a lot of those cities sort of cluster together, and why some of those territories might be the size they are. Another reason I was thinking, like, what would be, if you were trying to do this as an mental exercise, what are things you would look for if you were trying to divide up land? What are some questions you would want to know? Well, people need water. If you look at, they're kind of divided up where each one has a river or a water source. Some have more water than others. You'd probably want to have cities, because cities meant there were paths, and if you have cities, you have trade where people can exchange goods and benefit the neighbors, and the neighbors benefit them. Some of it would be security, access to the ocean. Is the land arable, meaning can they farm it or not? Is it better for sheep, which, as we know from Gad and Reuben, they said this is really great for sheep. Why don't you just give us these? We're shepherds, it's going to be wonderful. So they divide up these land and these parcels for reasons that are unfortunately not said. But just something to think about as we think about this division. So one of the other parts that I thought was kind of interesting in verse 8, it says, "Go and walk through the land and describe it and return to me. Then I will cast lots for you here before the Lord in Shiloh." Now perhaps I'm putting a little bit too much into this, but I was thinking about that idea of go and walk. We live on a 111-acre property at Phantom Ranch, and most of the time I'm driving from one end to the other in my van, just kind of going fast, blinders on, I gotta go do work. But when I have to walk from one point to the other, sometimes begrudgingly, experiencing camp on foot is like a whole different thing. It looks different, the scale of it is different. You can really appreciate your surroundings better when you're moving slow, and the idea of for them to have to walk through the land, I think maybe it gave them a better appreciation for the land. I don't know, perhaps I'm embellishing a little bit, but I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. One question that I had that I tried to answer, and I'm going to really have to move quicker here, is Shiloh. Why Shiloh? Well, if you look at, Shiloh is right here, and this is all the land that has to get divided. It just seems like a convenient spot for everybody to come together and figure out where everything's going to go, since it's right there in the middle of all of the land. Another part from verse 9 that I thought was noteworthy is describe it by cities and 7 divisions in a book. That idea of putting it into writing. If you deal with family, somebody once said, in dealings with family and friends, contracts are more important than with strangers. And as I was thinking about this, by them writing down these descriptions in a book, there could be no, well, you said that or you said that. It was all agreed upon, it was written down, it was codified for today when they're dividing up the land, and also in the future, like, hey, you know that that's not what the book said, remember? Like, no, that was it. Like, let's go to the book, we can look at it. And as we think about dealings with people, sometimes a piece of paper can bring about great peace among brothers. When you sit down and you write out what the agreement is, what you're going to do, as somebody who has to, not super frequently, but deal with outside vendors and writing contracts, anytime that somebody is hesitant to put in a contract of what they want to do, it's always a red flag to me. Like, what do we not understand about our expectations from each other that you are hesitant to enter into this? Like, we're just agreeing to do what you said. And by doing that, I'm agreeing to do what I said. Because there's always that sin nature of wanting to look out for ourselves. But when you're signing your name to it, you have to look out for the other person's interests as well as they have to look out for yours. There's mutual understanding that comes from contracts or writing things down in books. In verse 10, it says that Joshua then cast lots for them in Shiloh before the Lord regarding the land. And this is sort of that randomized part that I was talking about, like Joshua didn't know who was going to get what. But we know that the lot cast in the lap, the Lord determines the outcome. And I was thinking, how cool is it that for us, it can appear almost random that these different tribes got that. But God knows each of the people in each of these tribes and every hair on their heads and what is best for them. And He gets to decide ultimately who gets what land and what is most suitable for them. An application, as I was thinking about, what are some things that we sort of can be randomly assigned for the benefits of those around us? Have you ever thought about spiritual gifts? Like, you see them listed in the Bible. I think that after you've been a Christian for a while, you start to discover what your gifts are. and what your gifts are not. And then you meet people that have these gifts. And it always seems so random, and yet God has, through His Spirit, given each of us gifts, seemingly randomly, then brings people together as a body, so that when each person uses those gifts, they can build the body up. And God knows, I don't know what the criteria is as why